Like I said, techina or toveya or bakasha, those are all good words. And yet we're using specifically the word tefillah because tefillah means something a lot more. Tefillah means something a lot more than just asking for personal needs. While we do ask for our personal needs in prayer in tefillah, we're also doing a lot more than just that. And let's investigate it. Simply, prayer, the source of it is a commandment in the Torah. We learned it in our first class, that in a time of distress, we shall turn to God and pray. In a time of comfort, we shall express our gratitude to God. When all is well, we should pray for mercy. That Hashem should watch over us for our daily needs. But the obvious question that we've been trying to address is, why would God, an infinite God, an omnipotent God, require and need our prayers? Take, for example, a relationship between a parent and a child. A child doesn't have to pray for their parent to be fed and to be sheltered and to have warmth. It's something that the parent knows that the child needs. How much more so when we're talking about God? Of course, he knows, our Father in heaven knows the requirements of each and every one of us, even better than we know it ourselves. We may think we know what we need, but God certainly knows better. So why would we be required biblically to pray to God? So after a little reflection, what I want to try to come away with is to understand and hopefully reflect on this even yourself. You'll come up with this answer in your own heart. But it's been best explained by the Rambam. The Rambam wrote many books. He actually wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. It was one of his first books. He wrote his magnum opus, which is Maimonides, known as the Mishneh Torah, where he codified Jewish law. And he also incorporated in there lots of laws of prayer and laws of teshuvah, laws of every part of Torah. But at the end of his life, in the last 10, 11 years, from around 1191 till he passed away in around in the early 1200s, he wrote a book called, in Hebrew, Moreh Nevuchim. In English, it's called The Guide to the Perplexed. There aren't many translations to it because the Rambam himself, Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon himself, laid specific limitations on how to translate, specifications on how his guide should be translated. Because of the nuances, how it could be easily misunderstood or misinterpreted, he was very careful and picky on how it could be translated. So anyway, he writes in this book called The Guide to the Perplexed, he says, and we'll share our screen and we'll come back to our regular one. But for now, oops, hold on, I don't think I shared that. Let's go back for a moment. Let's try that again. Here we go. Can everyone see the screen? Okay, good. So our question is, why does God need our prayer? So Rambam in his book called The Moreh Nevuchim, The Guide to the Perplexed, he says, we are told to offer prayers to God in order to establish the true relationship, the true principle that God takes notice of our ways. Sorry for that typo. That success and failure are not the result of chance or accident. So God commands us, I like this Rambam, I like this statement from the Rambam, because what we're doing by praying is establishing a true principle, that God is involved in our life, and that everything that happens in our life is guided and happening with the hand of God. So like all commandments, prayer is a mitzvah, and God instructs us to do it not for our sake, not for his sake, but rather for our sake. Because the answer to the original question is, you're right, God does not need our prayers for his sake. God actually needs the prayers for our sake. We need the prayers. We need to hear the prayers. Because God could do without our prayers, but we can't without our prayers. So therefore, we pray daily. We pray rather often. And actually, just parenthetically, while we refer to God as our Father in heaven, more in the masculine, there's actually different parts of God. There's the feminine part of God and the masculine part of God. Now, the way we are made up, the way Hashem made us, naturally, our bodily organs, is the male is the giver and the female is the recipient. It's not necessarily a way in how we, the breadwinner could be either in the family, but the way our organs are made up is we have a giver and a receiver. The woman is the nurturer. She receives nurture, but she also gives nurture. And it's almost like the sun and moon relationship. Each are crucially important. One is the giver, one is the receiver. And in our relationship with God, when we are referring to God in prayer, we're referring to the masculine part of God, us as the feminine, meaning God is the one giving and we are the ones receiving. Whereas on Shabbat, for example, there's prayers in the Amidah of Shabbat where we refer to Shabbat, God's divine presence of Shabbat, as the feminine. The words in the Amidah we say on Friday night is V'yanuchu ba, Kol Yisrael. All the Jewish people rest on her, referring to Shabbat, rest on the day of Shabbat in the feminine, on this day of Shabbat. So it's known as the Shabbat Queen. There's the feminine side of God, whereas on our daily prayer, we're actually invoking Avinu Avarachaman, our Father, merciful Father, referring to the masculine side of God, in order for us to have the giver, the bestowing part of God in our relationship with God. Okay. By the way, as I'm looking, could everyone see me as I'm sharing the screen? Okay, everyone can see. I guess that's a choice of you. If I know Adrian had trouble last time with that. Adrian, if it's easier, I think on the top you have an option for speaker view or something, gallery view. It should say something like that on your screen. So therefore, if it's more comfortable for you while we're reading some of my slides, you could also see either me speaking or whoever will be speaking. It might make it easier. Is there a way you could unmute yourself if you have any questions? I think you could also, whoever has questions, you could also unmute yourself. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, so now we know that there is a beautiful dream Jacob has in the book of Genesis, in Parashat Vayetze, and he's running away from his evil brother. He refers, the way the Torah records this dream, it says, and he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. So there's a lot of commentaries about this dream of Jacob, of Yaakov Avinu, our patriarch, as he was running away from his evil twin brother. What this ladder in his dream represents. The way we could understand it, many commentaries explain that this ladder of the dream of Jacob is referring to the ladder of prayer, referring to our relationship with God that starts on the ground, set up on the ground, and the top reaches the heaven. So this ladder is a symbol for prayer. It's a way of having a connection between a human, between a person, and with God. What it means is the meaningful words of prayers are being ascending heavenward through this ladder. If you look at the words of this verse, I'm just going to quote it in the Hebrew as well. Vayachalom, v'hine sulam mutzav arza, v'rosho magia shamayma, v'hine malachei Elohim olim v'yardim bo. So I'm going to unshare my screen for a second just to explain you a beautiful story. Rashi is one of the foremost commentaries on the entire Torah. He addresses any question that a 5-year-old would come across when he's reading the simple pshat, which means the simple meaning of the Torah. In this verse, what's interesting is, it says Oh, Mrs. Berger, did you have a question? I think you could unmute yourself if you do. Oh, you can't? Allow participants to unmute themselves. It seems like you can, but I could unmute you.
I don't have a question.
Oh, I can hear you now.
I was telling my husband.
Oh, okay. Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Sure. So Rashi, the foremost commentary on the Torah, actually Adina's family, there are descendants of Rashi. He asks the following question. The verse says, the angels ascended and descended. It would make more sense. Angels are found in the heavens. Hence, they should first descend and then ascend. So Rashi gives a beautiful answer to this question. Rashi says that in fact, there were different angels. There was angels that were protecting Jacob in the Holy Land of Israel. So they were already with him. They needed to first ascend because they were not able to leave Israel to go to the diaspora where Jacob was heading to his uncle. And therefore, first they went up, and then new angels that were able to accompany him to the diaspora, to Haran, came and to protect him. In fact, there's a beautiful story. The Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, who was actually a grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich, the second Hasidic Rebbe, it says that he writes that he had always a warm heart. I don't know if that meant physically he had a warm heart or it just meant generously and spiritually he was always warm. But he said that as a young child, the Baal Shem Tov, who he met when he was a young child, the Baal Shem Tov touched him on his heart. He went like that to him. And since then, he always had a warm heart. So Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, as a child, he was a giant. He was a genius. He was a prodigy. And in Cheder, which was the Jewish school in Ukraine, all the questions that Rashi would pose, he, even before being able to read Rashi letters, just reading the verse of the Torah that his teacher was teaching him, he would already pose Rashi's question. He was that gifted that any question that Rashi addresses, he already knew. He would already ask that question. So they're going through the Torah, him and his teacher with the other students, and every question that comes up, he addresses, he asks. And the teacher gives Rashi's answer. But when it came to this verse, which the verse says this, angels ascended and then descended, he didn't ask any question. He didn't ask Rashi's question, which is, why did the angels first ascend and then descend? So the teacher was waiting. The student, Rabbi Yisrael, didn't ask. So the teacher said, Yisraelik, why didn't you ask Rashi's question? And he said, it's a dream. Angels could go any direction. If you're dreaming, it could happen even on a different, out of the ordinary style. But a different interpretation to this dream of the ladder with the angels ascending and descending is used to explain prayer. That my prayer and your prayer is actually the beginning of the ladder. We have a connection with God. Our ladder is the prayer that is continuing our communication with God. The angels ascending up the ladder are the words of prayer and the mindfulness, the kavanah, the thoughts and the resolutions that come as a result of our prayer that are being created. So there's angels that are emanating from our lips as words are being recited. And therefore, actually, the way we are to recite prayer is actually verbalizing the words. Prayer is not allowed to remain in the heart or in the mind. Prayer has to be expressed with the lips, because every word of prayer is actually emanating a different angel that is ascending your words to the heavens. So explaining this dream of Jacob's ladder with the angels first ascending and then descending is because the way our prayer begins is the words from the heart that continue through our lips, and the angels are being created, mounting up the ladder to heaven, and then expressing God's response back on earth, and therefore first ascending and then descending. So step one of prayer, up this ladder of Jacob's dream, step one is to engage ourselves with God. It's establishing our relationship with God, and that we have a relationship that is important, and that we don't rely on whatever happens in the world is not by accident. We have a relationship with God, acknowledging, recognizing that our lives are being driven by God. And every step of the way, we're acknowledging, expressing a gratitude to God and expressing our needs to God, realizing that it's coming from Hashem. So in truth, the prayer is needed not for God to hear the words, but it's for ourselves to hear the words, to constantly remind us that we are in a relationship with God, to constantly remind us that our words are important in a relationship and that we are being guided and driven with God. Up the rung of this ladder, on a higher note, the prayer has to do with things that are higher than just our material needs. They are more in tune with spiritual needs. The Hebrew word for tefillah comes from the word, and actually I wanted to show you, and Adrian, if you remember in our first class, we had a discrepancy of a word that we use for tefillah to mean binding together. And the question we had, and I've done some research, Adrian, thanks to your question, where tefillah comes with the letter taf, and I'll show you in a moment. And the word we had to bind together vessels, to assemble together, was with a tet. And I saw that those two letters could actually be interchanged. And hence the connection between tefillah to tofel. But over here, the way it's explained from the book of Psalms, the word tefillah, which means prayer, also comes from the word of self-judgment, of reflecting inward and seeing our true self. So I want to show you, I'll share the screen so you can see that yourself. Hope everyone can see the slide once again. We did that. Oh, I'm sorry. So we said from the Rambam, we are told to offer prayers to God in order to establish a true principle that God takes notice in our ways. We said that. So over here you see tefillah, which means prayer in Hebrew, comes from the word palel. The way we see that is actually from the book of Psalms. King David says, he reminds the story of Pinchas, who was the zealot in the Torah that stood up for justice. And the way the wording is Vayamod Pinchas vayifalel v'teyatzer hamagefa. There was a horrible plague going on amongst the Jewish people. It says that Pinchas stood up and executed justice. So palel means justice, and the plague was stopped. So tefillah means self-judgment, reflection inwards, or a better word would be self-evaluation. When we're in a mode of prayer in front of God, what we're doing is we're asking God for blessings. What we're doing is we are inevitably searching our souls and seeing and checking in whether we measure up to the standard that is befitting to have a conversation with God. We're being honest. We are being humbled in the fact that we could have, God is saying, approach me in prayer. When you go in to speak to a king, the King of Kings, and God is listening to these words, it's an incredible humbleness and feeling of worthiness. Is this really for me? You're searching inward and reflecting, who am I that I get to be in a place of prayer in front of God? So in that form of prayer, we are emphasizing God's infinite kindness and mercy, that he opens himself up to listen to our prayers, and that we are open now, searching inside of us, to be in a place, in a mode of refinement, to have that prayer with God. And not necessarily because we are deserving it, but because we are children in front of our parent. And as children, God is there to listen. As children in front of our parent, God is there to listen to our prayers. So just to take you through the first two rungs that we've been searching and climbing, steps up the ladder is rung one. We are working to engage ourselves with God, like Maimonides says, to recognize the blessings and to create a relationship with God. Rung two is to rise above material world. It's a time for self-evaluation, from the word tefillah, from the word palel, which means of judgment, self-evaluation and reflection. Rung three, which we touched on last week, is prayer is from the word avodah, is that service. The way the Torah commands us to pray to pray is ula'avdo b'chol levavchem, to pray, to serve God, which is prayer. It's a work of refinement. Now, this is perhaps my favorite part of it. It's removing the schmutz and uncovering the diamond that exists within each and every one of us, a diamond of the neshama, the soul, and hence the diamond that also takes place and exists within each and every one of us. When I pray, I uncover my diamond, but I also uncover your diamond. So before prayer, I may have a place of jealousy, animosity, anger, and which are natural traits to some degree. We all have that. When I pray, I'm uncovering that I have an incredible diamond inside of me. And I'm praying and I'm realizing that you also have that incredible diamond inside of you. So I'd just like to share a few stories on this, on this explanation. Avodah, work, means taking raw material, working with it, and refining it. In let's say the tefillin that we wear on our arm and head, to get that leather, for those that came with us to Crown Heights, we went to the scribal shop. We saw how there's rough leather, how they work with it, and how it becomes soft, and they could even mold it to make the tefillin itself and the straps for the tefillin to make a finished product. But it requires work. We have to remove the roughness. We have to remove impurities. Whether it's a rough piece of wood or even if it's a rough diamond, it has to be polished and to make it beautiful and to make it useful. So throughout Torah, we know already from Jacob in that same dream, the Jewish people are referred to as the earth of the dust of the earth and the sand by the sea, to the point where in Malachi, in one of the prophets, the Jewish people are referred to as Eretz Chayfetz, a desirable earth, a desirable land, God's desirable land. So the Baal Shem Tov explained why are the Jewish people compared to the earth by Jacob's dream and in the promises of God for children to the patriarchs. And then we see it from Malachi, we're referred to as a piece of land. So it's explained that the earth we know is full of treasures. Adina and I we took the children to the beach yesterday and in San Francisco, and we really enjoyed it. The idea of being out, and there was not even that many people. It was really nice. But you see every now and then a person going by with his metal rod, trying to search for, I don't know, what is he searching for? Gold, diamonds, whatever he's searching for. He's there with a detector. Because we know that you could discover beautiful diamonds and valuable stones dug beneath the ground. But in order to get to it, you have to dig and find it. Now, even once you find it, it's usually schmutzig. It's dirty. And we have to uncover the mud, uncover the dirt or mold, whatever it is that's covering away, polish it, like for gold or silver, and refine it to make it look shiny and beautiful. So by prayer, each and every one of us, the Baal Shem Tov continues in his comparison, each and every one of us have these beautiful diamonds. It's our job to uncover it, to reveal it, to polish it. Prayer is that time, the third rung up the ladder, is a time of avodah. It's a time of working. Not always is work so easy. It's a workout, but you know it's the right thing and it's the healthiest thing to uncover that diamond inside. Like I said, avodah requires work because we all have those natural traits of ego and jealousy and anger, etc. To subtle, even if it's on a subtle level or if it's on a more advanced or enhanced level. And to be Hashem's people and to be a human in general, it requires avodah to refine these traits and to uncover the goodness that exists under us and also between someone else. So in one word, tefillah would be, according to this run, tefillah is the refinery factory. It's a place where we are refining ourselves to look polished because we have a natural soul that is looking for our own needs, selfish wants, and then we have a godly soul. The time of tefillah is known as the time of battle. It's a work to uncover, to reveal the true goodness. Because in truth, Tanya, one of the foundational books of Chabad, explains that during the time of prayer, which is a time of war, and that's a quote from the Zohar that says, Shat Tzlotah, shat karva. The time of prayer is a time of war. But ultimately, when you pray and you take your time in prayer, what we can accomplish is actually to subtly refine even the animal soul to appreciate the value and uncovering the goodness that exists when we pray, the goodness within. So this is healthy. Not only are we asking for our physical needs, but it's also for our spiritual needs. It's like a vitamin for the soul. And we're reflecting that what am I doing and being worthy and being in a place to ask God for my needs. I'm committing myself during prayer to also be in a place to make sure that this world is a place that Hashem could call home, a place that Hashem feels comfortable. How is that? Through Torah and Tefillah and mitzvot. During the time of prayer is a time that each and every one of us are committing ourselves. Who is standing in prayer and not feeling a time that I'm more involved in my spiritual value in the world? So the time of prayer is that incredible time to really uncover within and to really reflect on our worth and realize that we have a relationship with Hashem, and that what am I doing in this relationship with Hashem to ascertain and to make sure that this world is a place that is not only refining myself, but I'm also refining world around me. And we'll see that when you pray, eventually it has a residual effect. Many people leave prayer on a high. They leave prayer feeling like they're on a high wave, on a mountain. That even after that wave subsides, they still feel, wow, I want to tell everyone about the wave. I want to tell everyone about the high, about the importance, not specifically about prayer, but about self-refinement and self-evaluation and reflection, which is what's happening during the time of prayer. And finally, the fourth rung would be tefillah as an attachment. Tefillah meaning of connection. And this is the highest rung up the ladder. Our neshama longs to be connected with Hashem. We know that before even our neshama comes into our world, our neshama is not even wanting to come into the world. Every mother that experiences childbirth, it's painful. And there's contractions. And the first sound the child makes upon entering this world is a cry. Because it's a cry of the body, but it's also a cry of the soul. The neshama saying, why do I want to be so detached from the heavenly abode? To a place of money and a place of all the schmutz that could happen in this world. So the time of prayer is that spiritual oasis of the neshama feeling, wow, this is where my comfort zone is. This is where I can sing and be at home and encourage the rest of my body that I'm housed in to be inspired by this, to affect my heart and to affect my mind with clarity and with inspiration that the neshama feels. And eventually when the neshama overflows that into the body, it also overflows that into its surroundings around. It's like Solomon says, Ner Hashem nishmat Adam. The flame of God is the soul of a person. That our neshama inside of us is like a flame. Our neshama is compared to a flame. For that reason, when we observe Yartzeit, or God forbid, after a person passes and we observe the Shiva, we have a flame, a candle burning in the home to remember the departed, to remember the deceased. Before a Yizkar, which we just had on Shabbat in honor of the holiday of Shavuot, always on the second day of the holiday or the last day of the holiday, we observe Yizkar and we light a flame before the holiday, before that day, to remind ourselves of the soul. Because the soul is like a flickering flame. And the nature of a flame is to always shake, to always trying to ascend upward. Every fire you see is always rising. Because the flame is trying to leave the holdback of the wick and of the flame of the wax itself, and it's striving to go upwards. And that's the nature of the soul. That's why actually many sway, shuckle when we pray, because it's a soulful experience of our soul, our neshama, feeling on fire, feeling like that flickery flame that is cleaving to something higher, something heavenward. It's a connection of spirit to spirit, and therefore it's fluttering to be united with God. And if the truth is, every mitzvah, we have that experience of the soul feeling that oasis, feeling that connection. How much more so when it comes to prayer, that attachment is that connection on steroids. That the neshama is feeling that an enormous, close, intimate bond with God. And if you take it as this example, when a king summons a servant, no matter if it's a high-ranking officer to a low servant, says, I need you to do this for me. And the servant fulfills it, the servant accomplishes it. It creates this incredible bond between the king and the servant. Even no matter how far apart they may be in terms of their lineage and their royalty, etc., but there's a bond that is being established between the king and the subject and his loyal servant. And the same is true when we pray. We are establishing a relationship with God, and it's that excitement. It's a feeling of excitement. God asks for my prayer, and I'm fulfilling it. That's by every mitzvah. How much more so when it comes to the mitzvah of prayer itself, which is the maximum time of connection. And nothing brings a person and a soul closer to Hashem than with prayer. To quote some of the sages of Midrash, it says that the time of prayer is like an embrace of God. I was actually just learning a Hasidic mimer this morning. Every Monday morning I learn with someone in our community. His name is Brad Pinchas Satkin. And we were just learning a beautiful mimer, a beautiful discourse of the Rebbe, that the Rebbe is quoting from the Zohar, from Kabbalistic sources, where the Zohar says that every word of prayer that comes out, it's so to speak, a kiss between us and God. That the word of prayer is not like what I was saying before, that it's the angels just ascending our words of prayer heavenward up the ladder, but at this degree, it's that attachment with God, that God is himself listening intently to the words of prayer, and it's almost creating this embrace and kiss, so to speak, between us and God. I found that to be a very powerful understanding when you reflect on prayer to that degree. It's an incredible power and potential. So now what we're going to try to do is, now that we understand a little bit of the word tefillah, prayer, we'll go back to the slides and see the history behind the prayers, and also the 3 daily prayers, how they were established and how it came to be the Siddur the way we have it today. So let's continue on our screen. Okay, so rung 3, we said prayer is a service. We said that one already. And finally, rung 4, prayer is tefillah as an attachment. So now we know we have 3 prayers that we do daily. At the beginning, it was just a commandment to pray at any time. But we do have sources already from King David. King David himself says in Psalms, I pray thrice daily. I pray 3 times a day. We know that also from Daniel, who was one of the prophets during time of the Babylonian exile in the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. It says, Daniel himself said, I pray 3 times a day. So we know from the tractate Brachot of Talmud that we pray 3 times a day, corresponding to our 3 patriarchs, who there's verses where it talks about their prayers. By Abraham, it says that Vayashkem Avram baboker. Abraham arose early in the morning and he saddled his donkey. What did he do early in the morning? It was the time of prayer. He rose in the morning to pray. By Yitzchak, it says, by Isaac, his son, it says, and Yitzchak went forth to pray. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh la'eit erev. The word lasuach means to speak. So what was he speaking? He went into the field to speak in the afternoon. Towards evening, he lifted his eyes and saw, and behold, camels were approaching. That's actually the first recorded story. The camels approaching was actually his future wife, Rivka, that Abraham sent Eliezer to find a bride for his wife, for his son, Yitzchak. But what was he doing in the field where he saw the camels? He was praying. So we see Yitzchak was establishing the afternoon prayer. Oops. And finally, Jacob, it says, and by the way, there's, I think, like 10 different ways of how to pronounce Jacob, how to spell Jacob in Hebrew. Yaakov, my brother's name is Yaakov, and everyone spells it in different ways. But it says, Vayifka bamakom. It says, and he arrived at the place and lodged there because the sun had set. And it says, and he took some of the stones of the place and placed them at his head, and he lay down in that place. So Rashi says, quoting the Midrash, as it says, interpreted as Vayifka bamakom, it was an expression of prayer. So we see the morning prayer was by Abraham, the afternoon, early evening prayer, Mincha, was by Yitzchak, and the evening prayer was by Yaakov. While I just showed you nicely how the three prayers, daily, morning, afternoon, and evening, have to do with our three patriarchs, there's a lot more that they offer to our prayers, more than just the time of prayer. It says that Abraham, our forefather, was Kabbalistically had the character of love, kindness, and generosity. We know that because his tent was open on all four sides. Actually, to remember this tent, our chuppah, when we get married, a Jewish marriage always takes place in a canopy that has to be open on four sides to remind ourselves of the hospitality of Abraham's home that was always open on the four sides. And we're establishing our home will be a home of achnasat orchim, a home of hospitality. Abraham's measure was the measure of love. His son Yitzchak served God with love, but also his main emphasis was on reverence and respect. And I think we touched upon that in the past. I don't know if it was this class or in our Pirkei Avot class. Thank God, Adina and I have been giving many classes throughout the week. In our Pirkei Avot class, I think, we were talking about reverence and respect, realizing the greatness of God and how fortunate we are to be in a relationship with God. Just like in a spousal relationship, we have our love where we want to be, or with our children, we want to embrace our children. But there's also a time when we have to appreciate the respect. Any parent knows this, that out of respect for your child, after they get married, sometimes you have to bite your tongue a little bit. It may be hard to do, but it's also a respectful thing that they have their certain ways, and it's hard sometimes to bite tongues, but it's important. I gave the example that my 6-year-old, now he's 9, but when he was 6 and he was off in first grade, I was so proud of him, and I wanted to embrace him, and he didn't want to be hugged in front of his friends. And out of respect, I had to hold back and not embrace him. So I wanted to shower him with love, but of course, the measure at that moment was actually one of respect for what he asked for. And the same, of course, is true in our relationship with God. There is that measure of love, but there's also the respect. Yitzchak served God with this reverence, awe, and respect. So he gives that part to prayer. Abraham gave the love part in prayer, realizing the love in our relationship with God. Ahavat olam, this eternal love, like we say in prayer. Yitzchak gave us the feeling of reverence, how fortunate we are. And while at one point unworthy we are to be in a relationship with God, yet God asked for a relationship. So we have this feeling of respect and reverence to be in this relationship. Jacob combined both, and what's known as the midah of rachamim, the midah of mercy. In prayer, mercy is actually an incredible thing. I quoted it a little earlier. We say, Avinu av harachman, our Father, merciful Father. We invoke the mercy of God on us, because if you reflect during prayer, the incredible source of where our neshama comes from, and to the lowly world that it came to, you almost have what's in Hebrew or Yiddish called rachmanis. You have pity, mercy on your soul. Not pity like nebach. Tessa, you're going to have to help me how to translate nebach. I'm not sure. But let me see. I'm going to unmute you, Tessa. Here.
Yeah, nebach, like, oh, it's, it's such a nebach. He's such a...
Perfect
I
description.
can't put it, there's no English. It's a nebach. It's, a poor thing. Poor
exactly.
thing.
That's the perfect Yiddish description. When you can't explain it, you just use another Yiddish word to explain the Yiddish. Tessa is helping. Tessa and I are going through are together joined in a Yiddish class on Wednesday mornings, and it's been a lot of fun. and Tessa's teaching me a lot, and we're learning a lot together in understanding different Yiddish phrases and songs, and it's been a lot of fun. So Nebuch is just one of those words that, oi, Nebuch, if you don't know what Nebuch means, it's a Nebuch, right? But in truth, it's a mercy, not in a negative term, but in a term of feeling our neshama, our pure neshama, wants to be in a relationship, and it's caught up in all this worldly stuff that the body wants. So the time of prayer is a time of mercy on our neshama, allowing it to soar heavenward, to climb up these mountains. So that while it's so distracted throughout time in our world, the time of prayer is a time where a godly soul is igniting that spark and allowing it to be fanned and waved to be expressed. So the first 1,000 years after the Torah was given, and I read it even from Abraham, but the first 1,000 years given through Moshe, the Torah at Sinai, which we just recommitted on Shavuos, on Friday, and Shabbat, on Shabbos, the first 1,000 years, there was no organized prayer. Prayer was from the heart. Every person had enough words to share during prayer. We had the time of the temple where there was offerings offered every day. There was the morning offering brought. It was called the Karban Shel Tamid. It was the daily offering in the morning. There was the daily offering in the late afternoon. And then at night, there was also the offerings that continued throughout the evening through till the morning. To correspond to these three different offerings in the temple every day, we actually instituted these three formalized prayer. So even though King David already did it, also resembling what was done in the temple during the time of the sanctuary in the temple, it became more formal once the temple was destroyed, where we didn't offer daily offerings anymore. So in order to keep up that and maintain that constant connection and constant reflection between us and God, and we weren't doing it through any more offerings in the temple during the time of the Babylonian exile, we actually instituted the formal prayer to be done 3 times a day. So even though I was able to show you sources of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob doing it, it wasn't yet formalized 3 times a day until the time of the first temple's destruction. We were being exiled to Babylonia. We were captives in Babylonia, but we continued to gather. What happened is the youth weren't speaking the holy tongue anymore. They weren't speaking Hebrew anymore. They were speaking Aramaic, which was the tongue of Babylonia, of that vicinity. So when we returned, while we continued prayer there, but when we returned, there was actually something more than the Sanhedrin. So usually what we had in Jewish history, all the way from Moses, it says that Moses ordained 70 elders, what later became known as the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin. And there were 70 members of this Supreme Court. Later, they increased that number to 120 because of the state of the Jews during the time of the temple, after the time of the temple's destruction. We were in a very low morale. So in order to boost it, in order to take bigger measures to implement and have greater strides to encourage, to enforce, and to enhance Jewish observance, we increased the number of our Sanhedrin to 120. They became known the members of the Great Assembly. They were called the Great Assembly because they were definitely an increased number than what we had during the times of the temple. So that was 120. Some very familiar names. Mordechai was part of the members of the Great Assembly. Daniel, that we just mentioned a little earlier, was part of them. Nehemiah, maybe he's not as known. Or Ezra. There's many people that are named after the Ezra, the scribe. They were the ones that led the Jewish people back to Jerusalem, back to the temple. And they instituted, even after the temple was rebuilt, a formalized wording of the prayer. So that became known as the Amidah, the way we know it today. That was already formalized, 18 blessings in the hands of the members of the Great Assembly. It's one of the many things that they established. Another one that's very famous is Kiddush and Havdalah. And there's many, many others that came in the hands of the members of the Great Assembly. I just want to fast forward a little bit. Even during the times of the Second Temple, that we had these prayers, and actually, unfortunately, many people did not return to Israel during the times of the Second Temple. My heritage on my mother's side is Sephardic, from the North African country of Tunisia. They claim to trace themselves back all the way to the times of the destruction of the First Temple. Yemen, Jews from Yemen, they're called the Taimani. They also trace themselves back way before. And so they never returned even after the Second Temple was built. So there was instituted this formalized prayer for Jews wherever they are. And by the time after the temple was destroyed, especially during the times when the Talmud was being formalized, 1800 years ago, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who formalized the Mishnah around the year 400 BCE, 350 to 400 BCE, but the basic order was done and established certainly after the Talmud 1600 years ago. So now what's really cool, I'll show you a couple of handwritings soon, the oldest tradition that we have of an actual Siddur. So Siddur means order, and the formalized order of the prayer was instituted by our sages of the Talmud. After the members of the Great Assembly, they enacted the formalized Siddur. The oldest Siddur that we have as tradition is from the countries of Babylonia, Iraq, where many Jews, when they were exiled, remained there, by Rabbi Amram Gaon. There was a period 1,200 years ago of the Jewish people. They were known as the period of the Gaonim, which are the period of the geniuses. There's different periods. We have the periods of the elders, the periods of the judges, the periods of the prophets. Like some of the famous judges were Samson and Deborah. And then came the time of the prophets, like Samuel. But later, after all that was finished, came the times of the Talmud, the Talmudic era. They were known as the Tanaic era and the Amoraic era. And later, after the Talmud was completed, the next era, the next generations, were known as the period of the Gaonim, of the geniuses. And there were some of the 10 Gaonim. One of them was Rabbi Amram Gaon, and he formalized a Siddur. We have a tradition of his Siddur, the way it is in a book. It was handwritten until it was printed in the 1800s. And I'll show you the timeline in a moment. His Siddur was actually requested by the Jews in Barcelona, Spain. Around 1,000 years ago, 1,100 years ago, they requested for a Siddur that they could follow along in. And that was copied, handwritten and copied by the Jews in Germany and France. And it was printed for the first time in Warsaw in 1865. There was another Siddur around 100 years later, after Rabbi Amram Gaon in the 1,100 years ago, Rabbi Sadia Gaon. And he wrote a Siddur for the Jews of the Arabic countries. So he actually has instructions in there in Arabic, instructions, explanations, meanings in Arabic, and with words of encouragement in Arabic to help the Jewish community there. Rambam, some 900 years ago, also has his prayer book. That's a lot more known. We have that on my bookshelf. The Rambam's Maimonides Nusach, which we'll learn what that means in a moment, his text of prayer. Let's just go through. So this is just what we were saying before, the prayer of the heart according to Maimonides, that is prayer. So here's I thought this would be helpful for people, a bit understanding the biblical period and the prayers that took place throughout. We have the Song at the Sea, which was what also during the time of the Golden Calf, God taught us a specific prayer to Moshe of forgiveness. It's known as the 13 attributes. We sing it every day with the minyan, but we also especially sing it over and over again on Yom Kippur. If you look towards the bottom, you'll see the time of Moshe and Joshua. Then came the period of the judges. And I see a question coming up. Thank you. That's a compliment. Thank you so much, Maddie. I appreciate it. And David, let me just take your question. Can our thoughts create angels? That's a good question. I don't know. I know our words definitely create angels. I don't know about our thoughts. Good question. Then we know the kingdom was divided. So this is just a little crash course of Jewish history. we were exiled. The 586 was the destruction of the temple, the first temple, by Nebuchadnezzar. And then some 70 years later, we returned to, in the year 516, we returned to rebuild the second temple. Not all the Jews came back, as I mentioned before. So they were instituted to correspond to the daily offerings, what became known as Maimadot, which were people that were representing us in the temple, standing over our offerings, but it also became in every community, we had the people praying for us in synagogues across Israel and across the world. Okay, well, let's go through a little bit of the laws of prayer, and then I wanted to show you the different nuschaot. So maybe I jumped the gun a little bit, so let's just go through this first, and let's just see a few more questions. Do you have a printout anywhere of the 13 attributes? Absolutely, and you know what? That's a great thing, Maddie. I'll take a note of it. I'll be happy to share that with everyone. Maddie, I wouldn't be surprised if you're actually familiar with the 13 attributes. It's usually sung as a song on Yom Kippur. I'm not going to. I'll spare you all from having to hear me sing it, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're familiar. But yeah, I would be happy to share it with you. It goes Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Yemet. And there's a lot of Kabbalah behind each word that God revealed this prayer to Moshe in a time of distress, in a time of mercy, how to invoke God. So thank you. I was pretty sure you would know it, Maddie. Awesome. Yeah. So let's just see some of the laws of prayer. The way it's worded, the history of it by Maimonides. So here we go. When Israel was exiled in the time of the wicked Nebuchadnezzar, they became interspersed in Persia and Greece and other nations. Children were born to them in these foreign countries, and those children's language was confused. The speech of each and every one was a concoction of many tongues. No one was able to express himself coherently in any one language, but rather in a mixture of languages. As states, and children spoke half in Ashdodit and did not know how to speak the Jewish languages, which is Lashon HaKodesh. Rather, they would speak according to the language of various other peoples. Consequently, when someone would pray, he would be limited in his ability to request his needs or to praise the Holy One, blessed be He, in Hebrew, unless other languages were mixed in with it. So when Ezra and his court saw this, they established the Amidah. The court is referring to the members of the Great Assembly. So the first three blessings of the Amidah are praises of God, and the last three are words of blessings of thanksgiving, Hoda'ah. The intermediate blessings, which are 13 blessings, contain requests for all those things that serve as a general category for the desires of each and every person and the needs of the whole community. Thus, the prayers could be set in the mouths of everyone. They could learn them quickly, and the prayers of those unable to express themselves would be as complete as the prayers of the most eloquent. It was because of this matter that they established all the blessings and prayers so they would be ordered in the mouths. And again, the word ordered is sidur, in the mouth of all Israel, so that each blessing would be set in the mouth of each person unable to express himself. So the words of prayer were there, set by Ezra, to allow us to begin and to allow our expression to flutter upward, to soar to heaven. So in order to begin and express ourselves, the words of prayer were formalized. What's interesting to note is that almost the entire prayer, from the beginning of our morning prayers to the verses of praise all the way through the Shema and the Amidah, a lot of it is based on the wording in the Torah and in the book of Psalms itself. Because what better way to express our appreciation, our gratitude, and our invoking God for blessings than the words that God and the prophets themselves express in the Torah. So we're using the words of God. So it's almost like, God, you have to listen because these are the words that you taught us. These are the words that you expressed for us to use, that God himself expressed. So on Shabbat and holiday, this is interesting. While on a regular day, there was daily offerings. There was 2 in the morning and afternoon, and in the evening and at night, there was the continual offering at night. On the holiday and on Shabbat, there was actually a musaf offering, which means an additional offering. And to recall and to reflect on that additional offering, we have an additional prayer known as the Amidah of Musaf. And on Yom Kippur, we had 5 and therefore we have 5 prayers. Okay, so now let's just see a little more of a timeline. We have the destruction of the temple that took place 69 or 70 CE. Now, during the Talmudic era, there was a general organized prayer that was being established. Now, added what's called in Hebrew or Aramaic piyutim, which are maybe hymns, or I don't know if anyone has a better terminology for piyut.
They're like poems.
Poems. That would be better than hymns. Yeah, you're right. I think poems. Yeah, piyutim are poems that were established in an incredible way. A lot of them go according to the alphabet. Thank you, Tessa. And that was mainly established in the 5th and 6th century. A lot of them were lost. A lot of them we don't have. We have a collection of maybe 100 or so, and we utilize them on of course, our high holidays and on Tisha B'Av and other times of the year where we have specific piyutim. And that's also customs of how we share these poems, piyutim. So this is what I was telling you before about the different, let's just see it as a summary. Sidur means order. So the oldest prayer book that has come down to us, and you know what, let's have someone else read. Tessa, would you be comfortable to read? Have you unmuted already?
Here we go. The Sidur is our traditional prayer book. Sidur means order. The oldest prayer book that has come down to us is the prayer book of Rav Amram Gaon, head of the yeshiva of Sura in Babylon, 875 CE. He had prepared it at the request of the Jews of Barcelona, Spain. It contains the arrangements of the prayers for the entire year, including also some laws concerning prayer and customs. It was copied and not used only by the Jews of Spain, but also by the Jews of France and Germany, and was in fact the standard prayer book for all Jewish communities. Seder Rav Amram Gaon remained in handwritten form for about 1,000 years until it was printed for the first time in Warsaw in 1865. Rav Sadia Gaon, who was the head of the Sura Yeshiva less than 100 years after Rav Amram Gaon, arranged a prayer book for the Jews in Arab countries with explanations and instructions in Arabic. The Rambam, Reb Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, in his famous Code of Jewish Law, also prepared the order of the prayers for the whole year.
Awesome. And one that I forgot here is also another very common Sidur, is known as the Machzor Vitri. It was codified by a disciple of Rashi. And Rashi was a leading rabbi. I quoted him before as a commentary on the Torah and on the Talmud. He was in France, Worms, France, and his student codified a Sidur based on his teacher Rashi's explanations. So from here, that was in the year 1208. So over here we have what's known as a Nusach. Now many people, even if you're not familiar with it, you'll recognize this, that depending if you are Sephardic or Ashkenazic, or a variation of Hasidic or anything in between, you have a different nusach, which is a different form or text of your prayer. It's quite subtle differences. For example, in the blessings before the Shema, some people pray a blessing that begins Ahavat Olam Ahavtanu, which means God loved us with an eternal love. Some people say Ahavat Rabbah, which means God loved us with a great love. It's quite subtle differences, but what I want you to appreciate is all of them, I'll just stop sharing the screen for a second, valued every letter of the wording of prayer and collected it, like I was saying before, dusting through, finding the most beautiful crown and diamonds to go on God's crown. So every word and every letter has an enormous amount of meaning and significance in the numbers of it, what it equals, in the shapes of it, and the significance behind the word, and the meaning of it, of course. Just to give you an example, I just came across this on Shabbat as I was studying and preparing. The word in Hebrew for yad is, which means a hand, is a yud and a daled. Yud and a daled spells the word yad, or like many of you are familiar, the blessing we say before, after washing our hands, before eating challah, is netilat yadayim, to wash our hands. So a yad is a hand. In numerology, the yad, which is a yud and a dalet, spells equals the numbers 14, because the yud is the 10th letter of the alphabet, that's 10. The dalet, aleph, bet, gimel, dalet is the 4th letter. Together it equals 14. When you put the yad together and you put two hands together, you have 14 times 2, you actually come to the word koach, which means strength. And it's, or like many of you are familiar with, yasha koach. What it's telling us is that in order for you to truly have strength, you have to put both your hands involved in something. You have to put your focus, your mind, your attention in something. You can't be cooking with one hand stirring and one hand on your phone watching YouTube. You're going to burn the pot. In order to be fully invested in something, you have to put your two hands in it. And what koach is strength, when you have both hands, because koach is the Hebrew letters kaf and chet, which equals the numbers 28. So when you have two hands, 14 times 2, you get to koach, which means strength. That's just an example that every letter and word is thought out, it's sifted through in order to get the most perfect prayer, that even if we are not understanding the meaning behind all the words, it's already been done for us. And we just have to kind of mention these words. Another example is in one of the blessings in our Amidah, it covers everything. One of the middle blessings is Rifa'inu Hashem, God heal us. And there's even a place there where you could mention anyone that you know that needs healing. It's a time to ask for healing. On a global level, on a Jewish level, on a personal family level, and for anyone you know. If you count the words in Rifa'inu, you have 27 words. And it's symbolizing a certain prayer in one of the books of Tanakh that it has 27 words to express a prayer of healing. So it was chosen to have 27 words in there for a very specific reason. We don't have to know all that. In fact, the Arizal, Rabbi Isaac Luria, I mentioned this, Tessa, in the Yiddish class, Rabbi Isaac Luria, who was a great Kabbalist, and we'll get to him in a moment, his own nusach, his own form of prayer, he said, with all the mindful and kavanah intentions behind the words, soul behind the words, he said, Ani mitbalel al dat zehatino. God, I am praying with the sincerity, the innocence, and the purity of this young child. A child just prays without understanding all of it. Let me pray, Rabbi Isaac Luria says, with his sincerity. So while we may pray with great and invoke great mind feelings from our mind and our heart, ultimately we're praying like a child to a parent. Okay, so a nusach is a different, a subtle text difference, very subtle differences. The form from Ezra is going to be the same. And there's some nuances in how to best perfect and express it in this way. Is it an eternal love we're reflecting with God, or a great love, for example? But the body is the same with slight differences. In fact, the Maggid of Mezrich tells us that there's 13 general nuschaot, 13 general texts, subtle differences, and each one of them is like a different gateway to ascend to heaven. You could go in from, we know around Jerusalem, many of you have been to the different gates around Jerusalem. If I'm not mistaken, there's 8 gates. And we had it in our Juperty a couple of weeks ago. Right, it's 8. Anyone could correct me on there? I think it's 8. So each one is accessing the inner chambers of God from a different angle. But the Maggid continues that the Rabbi Isaac Luria, who I mentioned before, this Kabbalist from Tzfat, who died in 1572 in the holy city of Tzfat, he was able to almost create like a master key of some sort and create a general formalized prayer that includes from all of these gates. So it's like a general ascension going through the main gate, I would say. Whichever nusach, that remains the structure. The Rebbe actually, it's interesting to note, the Rebbe would encourage whoever would become Chabad or any other style of prayer, the Rebbe would encourage them to continue their form of prayer the way they were taught. Because it's very special how it's being taught, the tradition of your form of prayer. There are very subtle differences, so you may have not been taught one specific one, just a general one, and that's pretty normal. So the main structure of prayer is We start with morning blessings. It's known as Birchot HaShachar, the blessings in the morning, and Tefilat HaShachar, prayers of the morning. It continues with verses of praise, Psukei de Zimra, Shema and its blessings, and the final part of the prayer, the highest part of the ladder, is known as the Amidah. Each one of these has chosen words, the way it's taken culled by the sages, the members of the Great Assembly, from words of Torah and words of Tanakh. So the words already are in the best possible way for it to be said. Now, of course, like we mentioned in the first class, you can pray in any language. There is something eloquent about the prayer in the Hebrew because of the background, how these words specifically were chosen, or the poem, how it fits in with Aleph, Bet, etc. But any language you pray in and you speak in is the perfect language. All right, let's see. I think I have just a couple more slides, and then we'll open up for questions. So this is the image of a prayer book. So I just wanted to get to this idea of the nusach. Nusach means a text or form, and is sometimes referred to as a minhag, which means custom or the rite. When we pick up a prayer book, there will be an indication on the front what nusach or minhag the prayer book belongs to. So some of the common ones you will see is nusach Sfarad, which is the Spanish, or nusach Ashkenaz, which is the German form, the nusach Poilin, which is the Polish, and nusach Ari, which is the one actually we pray from. This is arranged according to the Rabbi Yitzchak or Isaac Luria, and that's a very common one that Chabad uses, but there's obviously different variations, but the body and structure of the prayer remains the same. I'm just going to take some questions and then just give you some final thoughts. So is multitasking not advised in Judaism? That's a great question, Maddie. Anyone want to answer that? I would love your thoughts. I have to think about it. Multitasking. I would say we're always multitasking. Everything in Judaism has a duality between in prayer itself. And in some classes, you'll hear me say, or hear any teacher say, that the ultimate part of prayer is the mind you put into it, the kavanah, the intention, the fervor, and the intensity of the words. So it's not necessarily what you're saying, it's how it's being said, and the enthusiasm and mind and kavanah of how it's being said. That's the energy behind it. But on the other hand, you have to say the words to fulfill the mitzvah. So on the other hand, you'll hear me say that saying the words, even if you don't understand what you're saying, is going to be the most important. So I think there's always that duality, and there's always that multitasking. Am I focusing more on the intention behind the word, or on the words itself? Am I focusing more on the mitzvah itself, the action itself? Or are you focusing more on the soul of the mitzvah? What I mean by that is when you practice Shabbat in your home, there's a simple text of the Kiddush that you say and the order of how it's done. But you could be doing it, but it could be done very dully, very stale. And it needs to be done with passion, warmth, excitement. And if you don't, are you fulfilling the mitzvah? Probably. Is it being done right? I don't know. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think Judaism is founded on multitasking. But I don't know if I'm fully answering your question. Did anyone have any other thoughts on that?
Well, if multitasking has to do with doing two things at the same time, then I would say it can't be done when you're praying. And I asked once Solomon Schechter Shalomi, what happens when you're praying and other thoughts come in your head to distract you? And what he said was, go with that thought, get rid of it, and then go back to your prayer. Don't fight it because you won't win.
Beautiful. And Rabbi Zalman Schechter, blessed memory, was originally a chassid by the Rebbe. And did I share this in this class? Maybe not. The source of that story, it's a beautiful story. And Rabbi Zalman That's amazing that you heard it from him directly, right? That was face to face, right? You heard that from him. That's amazing.
Yeah.
No, I said to him how.
Yeah, but we were face to face. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful story because there's certain traditions that they actually pray very quickly, and if you ask them why, they say we're worried that strange foreign thoughts are going to come in, because when you're slowing down, more thoughts get in because you're not occupied with anything else, and when thoughts come in, usually they're not going to be the most appropriate one. So it's better to get it over with. And the example they gave is like if there's bandits, thieves in a forest and you have to get through it, the best thing is to trudge along, not take any breaks, and not let them have a chance to jump on. But the Hasidic way, and Reb Zalman, it's a beautiful story from Reb Zalman, is on the contrary, you go extra slow. So they may feel invited on, but you are balanced and prepared that if those strange thoughts come in, you're ready to deal with them and to channel them in the right way. So it's almost like the bandit coming on to the wagon, but you're so prepared for it in your mode of prayer that you're able to utilize it and get rid of it or whatever needs to be done with it. But yeah, I guess multitasking wouldn't mean taking out the garbage at the same time of prayer or changing a diaper. Yeah, that's well said, Fred. Okay.
Now, I'd like to contribute to the multitasking discussion because I read a wonderful book some time ago called The Myth of Multitasking, which basically agrees with what Fred said, that it's not really possible to do it if you're trying to do two things that both take some kind of mental energy. You can drive while you're eating a sandwich because one of them is automatic, usually the eating part. But there's really no such thing as multitasking when you're talking about doing significant energy-taking activities.
Thank you. Awesome. Let me go to the next question. Maddie, you're asking a good question. In yeshiva, did they teach us numerology? They didn't specifically teach us. It just would come up in many, many parts of Torah learning. There's actually one of the great commentaries on the Torah. He lived around 550 years ago. His name was Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Asher. He was known simply as the Baal HaTurim. Actually, he, based on his commentary of Talmud, the whole law, code of Jewish law, was based on his book. I have it on my bookshelves. It's many, many volumes. But one of the things that he contributed to the Torah was expressing Torah through numbers. He was like a computer hundreds of years ago, where he would take any verse and not only tell you how much it equals, he would be able to tell you if you take the third letter of each word, it would equal this, which corresponds to the third letter of each word in that verse, and parallel the verses together and make a whole chalent pot out of it. But numbers do have a big significance in Judaism. I'm actually giving a starter's Hebrew reading course, and together with each letter, which could be a little dull to just read the Hebrew itself, in learning Hebrew. So we're also giving numbers behind it, and we're taking people's names in the class and taking their numbers and taking other words that equal the same number and explaining significance and meaning. For example, a famous one is Mashiach, which is the time that we're praying and hoping for, is made up of a mem, shin, yud, chet. Together it equals the number 358. If you take Moshe, 350, hold on, mem, mashi, yeah, 358. If you take Moshe, hold on, I forgot this one. Oh, sorry, if you take Shaliach, a Shaliach equals 348. The Shaliach is a representative. And in truth, each and every one of us, the usual term is referred to as Chabad rabbis and rebbitzins that are Shiluchim, representatives of the Rebbe across the world. But also, the word Shaliach is a representative of God, an ambassador of light, which is in fact each and every one of us. We were mandated a charge at Sinai, which we just recommitted for the 3,332nd time on Friday, to be a pillar of light, a beacon of light for the world. So each and every one of us is a shliach. A shliach is 348. Shin lamed yud chet. If you take the shliach, which is each and every one of us, and we work in this world with all 10 parts of our supernal being, of our soul, divine energy, which God gave into us. And Maddie, we're learning about these sefirot in Tanya, and some of you on the class on tonight's learning learned it with Adina, the 10 Sefirot, the 10 divine channels of how God mirrors his energy into the world, and how our soul interfaces with the world outside of us is through 10 soul or divine powers. If you take the Shaliach, us, me and you utilize each and every one of us of our divine soul powers, we have Mashiach. 348 plus the 10 divine energy, we have Mashiach, which is 358, which is the time that we're all praying and hoping for. So again, that's just another example of numerology. So is that angelic? Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I want to ask you a question because you said shaliach. I want to bring it up.
Sure.
You're talking about when you daven, you have to have your intent, you have to have your kavanah, you have to, because you want the words to reach Hashem. When we're in a communal setting and you have a shaliach davening,
Right.
I find it sometimes problematic. If you should excuse me, if you know maybe a little too much about the shaliach in personal life, and sometimes you have to say, do I want that person representing me in my prayers? So I find that, if anything, uncomfortable. No?
So I'm actually on a simple level, Tessa, I'm actually totally with you on that. In fact, in Jewish law, it says it has to be someone that's the elite chosen for the job. There's a big list of fitting the job to be the Shaliach Tzibor, to be the communal representative at the front. So you're right. I mean, there's no, you read any of the, I don't know if you ever saw, there's a section in our High Holiday, right before the Musaf prayer, there's a kind of a quiet confession that the Chazan recites. It's called Hineni, but it became more of a Chazanic rendition. And
Right.
He says that even if I'm not worthy, but I'm coming on behalf of the community, and they sent me here, and don't turn away from my prayers and my supplication. In truth, in Jewish law, it has to be someone that's chosen and someone that is representing everyone. Could it be that before they stand up there, they say, God, please forgive me on all my wrongdoings, and I'm committing myself to a better life? We don't know what's going on in the heart and the soul of prayer of each person. But I'm with you. But listen, at the end of the day, we're Jewish people, and who could get along with everyone in Shul? It's more on a joke level. We should all really be getting along, and we should have Avat Yisrael. But yeah, it's hard to find that right person, right? Who would be able to lead us?
When you daven or Fred davens, I feel very well taken care of.
I miss Shul now, Tessa. You're making me miss Shul. Thank you. That's a very tough question. I don't have a better answer. I wish I did. I wish the answer was able to be, halavai, we get along with everyone, and everyone is flawless that could represent the masses, right? Tessa, I really appreciate the question. If anyone has another answer or another angle of how we could, it's a great question. How could we listen to someone representing us when they know, I'll just bring up, maybe there in Orthodox circles, I'm not sure if this is the same in Reform and Conservative. We have what's called duchening, which is the priestly blessing. Do they do it, Fred? And they don't do it in Kosher, right?
No, we don't.
Are you familiar with it?
Oh,
Of
yeah.
course.
In Yiddish, it's called duchening. It's the priestly blessing it's given by the Kohen. We do it specifically on the holidays. Sephardim, and then in Israel, they do it actually every Shabbat. In Jerusalem, they do it every day.
You saw it in Jerusalem.
Say again?
We saw it in Jerusalem.
The famous place is actually by the Western Wall. Usually, Passover was heartbreaking that they weren't able to do it, but usually on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediate days of the holiday, I think it's somewhere around 75, 80,000 Jewish people gather together and receive the blessings at the Western Wall, mimicking it's the closest resemblance to the way we had it by the times of the temple, of course. But the point of what I'm saying is a Kohen that is less than worthy, but he's giving us the blessings. Should we receive the blessings from this person or not? It's a very heated question, and I don't have a good answer, but I'm with you on the question. Are you sure it's 12 gates?
Well, we looked it up on Google.
Okay, I won't argue with Google.
And there's a folk song, 12 Gates to the City.
Oh, talking about the city of Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
okay.
what we thought it was 12, so we looked it up.
Okay,
I
so
have a question. I have a different question. The question about praying out loud versus quietly or to yourself. That was the question.
you have to ask a little more. Tell me a little more. Tell me your.
Well, when we're davening, do we need to daven out loud? For instance, when the Kohen Gadol went into the Holy of Holies,
It was a silent prayer.
they had bells on the bottom because obviously he wasn't saying anything out loud. So his prayer must have been quiet. We usually daven, at least most of it, except for Shemona Esrei, we daven out loud.
So I'm sure some of the women were on a class with Adina, and tell me if you remember this or not. I put this in one of the slides quickly. I was assuming some of you remember this class with Adina of Hannah and her prayer. Hannah was the first woman to be called Hannah. She was Hannah. I have a sister named Hannah. The Rebbe's mother was named Hannah. It's a pretty common Jewish name, but the original Hannah was the mother of the prophet Samuel, Shmuel, Hanavi, and she taught us how to pray. It said that when she went to pray to God in the temple, before there was a temple in the sanctuary, she gave a silent prayer, and the Kohen Gadol couldn't hear the prayer and said she must be drunk, and he rebuked her for being drunk. Because until that time, everyone's prayed out loud. She taught us to pray quietly, and that a person could be more inward in their prayers when they're praying out loud. And I think I taught this in Pirkei Avot class. It says in the Mishnah that when the Jewish people stood in the temple by the pilgrimage, by the holiday season, when everyone would come to pray, we stood like sardines. That's not the word in the Mishnah. We stood packed, arm to arm. But when it came time to bow, which we don't do now, but in temple times we would bow, and the Kohen Gadol would mention God's holy name. We would bow, and we would all have ample space. It said every person had 6 feet, literally social distance to the other person. It was 4 cubits, which is 6 feet from everyone else. And that was a miracle. It was one of the miracles that God put in the temple, that we stood so packed, arm shoulder to shoulder, and yet when it came time to pray, to bow, we all did it separately and was given ample space, because when we bowed, we would actually confess what's going on in our hearts. And in Judaism, we don't have a confession to a priest. No one listens to our confession. It's supposed to be very personal. We don't want people to hear what we're saying, and therefore us be uncomfortable and hide it. And therefore, God gave each and every one of us our space so we could verbalize the words and yet not be heard by someone else. So that was a miracle that God performed in the temple so that we could verbalize it and yet not be heard. So there has to be that verbalization, I think that's a real word, of it, verbalization of it, but at the same time, not be disturbing everyone else. So there are parts of our prayer where we do together, where it doesn't require the same fervor concentration. Take, for example, Ashrei, but the Amidah, we're supposed to actually do quietly while still hearing ourselves. It shouldn't be heard by anyone else. Shema is actually an interesting thing. On one hand, we do it out loud, but on the other hand, we cover our eyes in order not to have distractions. So while we're doing it together, we're actually also closing our eyes to focus inward to allow that intensity of concentration, or kavanah and dveikut, cleaving and connection with God, to be maximized. I don't think I'm answering your question, Fred. Should we or should we not?
That's the problem with the question or with the answer, is that it's a duality. We have sometimes when we do pray silently, and sometimes when we're supposed to pray out loud. So it's a problem.
Like I told you before, Judaism is multitasked, which means we have all parts to it. So I guess it's multi-layered would be the better word, as you were saying, and similar to that. Hold on one second. Let me just go through a few more questions, and then we'll call it a day. Oh yeah, so Maddie, exactly. I got your multitasking when you gave the example. I got that one. So it's 12 gates of the city. I have to check that up. We'll circle that. The book said it's not multitasking, it's sequential tasking. Okay, the book is called The Myth of Multitasking, and maybe switching tasking. Numerology and Jews are also connected to angels. I don't know. I don't know if numerology is connected to angels. Not that I know of. That would be my answer. So my answer is I don't know. Okay, so yeah, what's mine? Let me just conclude. Okay, so that will end our third part of prayer. I'm sure I'm missing some out. I had quite a lot of notes that I did not even get a chance to look at.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to conclude actually with one little final thought that perhaps is not so appropriate to share at a sermon because it could be taken the wrong way, but more, I guess, on an intimate setting that's being recorded for all to listen to later. Maybe it's appropriate or not. But Rabbi Shalom, there was a Chabad rabbi that passed away several years ago. His name was Rabbi Josh Gordon, an incredible rabbi, very charismatic. He was in the valley, San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. I loved him. Medina was actually very close to his daughter. He came up here a few times to Farbrengen to inspire the Chabad rabbis in the area. He gave a daily class. It's on Chabad.org. That's an incredible class, a daily Chumash class, a daily Tanya class, a daily Rambam class. He would always share stories of his father. His father was a Chabad rabbi in Newark, New Jersey, but not like a typical Chabad house. He was hired, this is in the 40s, he was hired by an Orthodox synagogue in Newark, New Jersey to be their rabbi. But he was a Chabadnik. He was a follower of the previous Rebbe in New York, and he assumed the position. But things weren't going the way he wanted to. They were looking to be more modern and affluent and assimilated. And he was trying to keep tradition alive and strong. There was what's very common in many synagogues. There was a tension. They were paying his salary and they were deciding on the board. But he was the rabbi saying, "I don't want it this way." So he would complain a lot to the previous Rebbe on different occasions. And one time he said, "Like, I'm trying to inspire, I'm trying to give, and they're not taking. Anytime I see them wherever they are, they're not listening." So the previous Rebbe gave a beautiful analogy. I just want to end tonight's class with this explanation. In Yiddish, in English it's called a sauna, but it doesn't give you justice to understand what a schwitz is. A schwitz is a place where people sweat, and when you're feeling warm, you acclimate your body heat to the schwitz. You turn up the temperature, you put more coals in, you go to the next bench up, and the heat rises, and you go to the final bench. And there's even someone in the schwitz, in the olden schwitz in the shtetls, that their job would be to take the towels and whip you. Meaning, as your body is heating up, it would feel good when you're schmeiss, when you're kind of whipped. And that's what you would pay. There was someone there. He would be hired to be the schwitz attendant, and he would, when you're feeling up to it and acclimated to the body heat, he would whip you. It doesn't sound like a good word, but he would schmeiss you. And so the previous Rebbe told Rabbi Gordon in the 40s, he said, you have to realize that it's like a schwitz. He gave them the analogy, you have to inspire people like a schwitz. If you go to a person in the middle of the street and take a towel and start whipping them, they will call the cops on you. They would think you're a lunatic. You're crazy. Why are you whipping me in the middle of the street? But if you find them in a schwitz and they're acclimated to that heat and that temperature, that not only do they want it, they beg you for it. They pay you to schmeiss them. They pay you because it feels good in the schwitz when they're being whipped with a towel. But if you do it on Broadway and Fifth, you're crazy. So he said the same is also when you want to inspire others, you can't just find raw inspiration, go to a store and see them buying non-kosher and start screaming at them and saying, "How could you do this?" And see them on Shabbos doing that and say, "How could you do this?" You have to warm them up to it. You have to heat up. You have to acclimate their body temperature to be able to not only appreciate it and take it, but even want it and need it and feel, I'm going to pay you for it. And the same is true. Tefillah, prayer, is actually that time of acclimating our body temperature to be in line with our soul. Because our soul always wants it. And like I said before, our neshama is feeling that oasis in the time of prayer. But what it's doing is it's shuckling, it's a flame, it's fire, it's alive, where the soul is acclimated already to that temperature, and now it's getting the body on board. When the body is on board for it, when the body is feeling it, you could convince it of anything. You could whip it anywhere, and it takes it. You could take resolutions in the time of prayer, but you have to heat yourself up. You can't just go dry and say, "I'm going to start doing this and start doing that." It's not going to work. It needs to be done with a steady prayer, not just one day of climbing the ladder, a steady climbing up the ladder, and then you will acclimate to a certain temperature and feel this is befitting for me to live a certain lifestyle, to take upon yourself a certain mitzvah, and to be inspired in a certain way, and to be even able to share inspiration with others. So prayer is really a backbone to warm yourself in order to be able to carry that wave and climb that ladder, that it shouldn't only remain in effect during the time of prayer, but that warmth heats the rest of our day and the rest of our week and the family around us and the influence and our sphere around us to be able to be in that mode and inspiration as well. So with that, we'll pray for the ultimate blessing of healing with the coming of Mashiach, and may it happen speedily in our days. God willing, next week will be our final class on prayer. I'm still curious on that 8 prayers, and I had one more question that I was going to get back to Maddie on. Okay, we'll call that a day. Yeshkoach, everyone, thank you for joining and for listening.
Thank
for,
you.
putting your experience and thoughts into this.
Yeshkoach.
Yeshkoach, Laila Tov.
Laila Tov, everyone. Stay safe and
Laila
healthy,
Tov.
please.
Shavua Tov.